live, guys. So yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. It is noon here. So good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us today. My name is Kevin Mahan. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Jensen Dental. We're excited that you're joining us for this Facebook Live broadcast. Today, I am joined by Don Cornell and Jack Marrano, and we're excited to spend a little bit of time with you. Just a little insight into who our speakers are today. Jack Marrano got his start in dental technology about 18 years ago. First was a Marine and served our country. And Jack, thank you for your service. We appreciate that. But got his start at Micro DTI, helping to run that business, that laboratory out west, and then moved east and worked with Lee Culp at Sculpture Dental as their Director of Technical Artistry, and is now currently the Director of Prosthetics for Absolute Dental in Raleigh, North Carolina for their high-end division. So we're excited to have Jack join us. Jack, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Excited to spend some time with you. And we also have Don Cornell, who, as many of you know, has an extensive career in the dental laboratory side and working with some industry greats like Dr. Winter, just to name one, but also is a dental publication owner as well. Owned Dental Dialogue, a very well-respected dental publication. I think a lot of us miss what that used to be. Don, you did a great job with it. And he's also an internationally recognized speaker. So we're excited to spend some time with you this morning as we talk about how do you MiYO, and how does that affect or impact the environment we're in today, which, as you know, has changed a lot in the last few months. But I think we're going to get some great insights. We do encourage you to chat and ask some questions along the way. Our speakers will address those questions, so we encourage you to make it interactive. So at this point, gentlemen, I am going to disappear and let you two have some fun. So enjoy.
All right.
So thanks, Kevin. So you referenced us as speakers. I think Jack and I have a little bit different understanding of what we're going to do here today, but I certainly understand. I think for our enjoyment, and I think for yours, for those listening as well, Jack and I thought we'd have a pretty casual dialogue about what Jack's experience has been. Tell us a little bit about his laboratory and kind of what they're doing with MiYO. So maybe Jack, for the purposes of those that are listening today, you can just give us a really brief explanation of kind of what your lab's all about, what you guys are doing, kinds of cases you're doing, and we can go from there.
Sure. Absolute, of course, the main headquarters is in Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, but we have 4 locations in the Southeast, 3 total in North Carolina and 1 in South Carolina. The laboratory, of course, is full service, full solutions, everything from surgical to, advanced cosmetic cases. And, it's a great group. There's about just over 100 some odd technicians. So it's a big organization. And everybody is really, really passionate there. It's a passionate group of technicians. Conrad Rensburg and Dries Van Aert are the owners of the laboratory. And I teamed up with them just over 2 years now. So it's been a great time since I've been there.
Great. And I had the pleasure of seeing you in Chicago, Jack, for the first time, actually, giving a presentation. And I was very impressed not only by what you were doing, but it seems like you got a really good team of folks there that are all really functioning at a really high level.
Yeah. And that's part of, what kind of MiYO brings for me. It brings a lot of excitement as a ceramist, and what I'm able to do with it. And then also what it's able to, when you bring it into the laboratory, the technicians start using the product and the restorations they're fabricating. The results are really, really awesome. So we have brought it out and rolled it out throughout Absolute Dental Services, all of the branches. And all of the technicians, I tell everybody, first and foremost, I'm always very humbled, and I like to say there's tons of ceramists that are way better than me, to give them credit. But I tell everybody can do this, and that's kind of the exciting part for me, where a lot of times I like to show the technicians on the Absolute Art team which is the advanced restorative team I started when I got there, kind of showcase their work and what they're doing with MiYO, because their results have been awesome. So I really like to show them, kind of give them a lot of credit for what they're able and capable of doing.
And I'm assuming, Jack, that most of these people at some point in time were all layering ceramic materials?
Yeah, when I first got to the laboratory, they were. There was lots and lots of layering, and one of my beliefs has always been something that's kind of, when we look at technology and dental technology and kind of the new material advancements that are out there, one of the key things that's always been in the back of my mind is full contour, or close to it, as far as being more efficient. And when I first got there was lots of layering going on in the laboratory, and especially with hybrids. They were doing absolute, kind of had a name for themselves with chrome cobalts, fully layered hybrids. And when I first got there, we started, taking a look more at zirconia hybrids, which I've been kind of working on for kind of almost the onset of the all-on X type cases. So we were able to bring that in and kind of get them up to speed on working on, a lot less layering than they were doing. And now it's almost virtually eliminated.
You mentioned efficiencies. I mean, no doubt layering is not nearly as efficient as monolithic. The big problem with monolithic has been our perception of the limitations around the aesthetics that you get from it. I remember I was standing on a podium 10 years ago at one of the Jensen days in Chicago, and monolithic was just monolithic zirconia, I should say, was just really coming into the market. This was like 2008, 2009. Glidewell had introduced Bruxier, and this was by Glidewell's own admission, it was a kind of a white gold restoration. It wasn't being sold for its aesthetics. It was being sold for how robust it was, right? And the fact that it was fully CAD/CAM manufactured. So the wrap on monolithic has been, it's great. It's very efficient. We can make it completely automated in a CAD/CAM system, which really fits into our workflow in most labs today. But aesthetics has always been the weak link. And why don't you talk to me a little bit about how you guys have navigated that with your customers? What I'd really like to know from you, Jack, is you have these high-end restorations.
Mm-hmm.
You've been traditionally layering them. You got to clearly have a very talented team. The patients, your clients and their patients have a very high expectation of the aesthetic results they're going to get. Why don't you walk me through how you transition those customers, how you transition your team, how you transition the expectations of your dentists and their patients? What was that experience? How did it look? I mean, what did that look like? Did you tell them you were going to go monolithic? Did you show them and then have a discussion? Why don't you kind of share with us how that whole thing happened?
Okay. Yeah. It was kind of a multifaceted approach. And, it's when I first came in, it first and foremost is kind of educating and training the technicians. And like yourself, for many years, I've done education, and it's one of the hardest things. It's the most rewarding for me. It's what I enjoy the most. But, teaching everybody, and it goes back to, kind of scaling, right? By far something professionally I have personally had the most trouble with, and something that I had not achieved successfully yet, until I got to Absolute and working with MiYO. So working with the technicians and having them understand how it works and the application of the material, and then them seeing the actual results themselves, and really is satisfying and rewarding, and they love it. It's funny, we have our master ceramist Yansu Kim at the laboratory, and he was primarily in charge doing the chrome cobalt full arch layering cases. Once you start using it, I gotta say, it becomes a little bit addicting. You look back at it and you can't think of doing a restoration any other way. And I joke with him all the time. I said, "Hey, you want to layer some frameworks?" And he just starts laughing and shakes his head like this. Because, what you got to do, and it's evident very quickly, is you got to show that we can get the same aesthetics, if not better, I would argue, by using this material. And what we've been able to do at the laboratory with the doctors, we kind of informed them and talked about what we're doing kind of from an educational standpoint, because they don't really understand it, right? MiYO has had a great following on the clinical side, without a doubt. And I'm going to kind of roll this back to you, Don, and what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which was, very exciting and great knowledge for myself a little bit, is, we have had so many advancements in dental technology, from the software to the hardware to the materials. And with zirconia, like you said, when zirconia, I've been using zirconia since it was, first out. And the challenge has always been aesthetics, especially with full contour. And so what did we do as technicians? We took that material and we, came up with, early on, invented all types of techniques to increase aesthetics, minimal layering techniques, hybrid layering techniques, what have you. Now we've, progressed in the zirconia, and the quality of the zirconia has progressed, and the aesthetics of it. And now, with the application of MiYO, it's a match made in heaven. It really, really is. And that's where it's exciting, because everything has kind of come to a point now where, unfortunately, with the exception of MiYO, everything to date on ceramic side, traditionally as we know it, has remained the same. And now we look at, application techniques, and, you'll see the same technique, but with a little bit of different spin being, put out there. And it hasn't changed except for MiYO. So, I mean, what we were talking about a little bit earlier, kind of where did this kind of idea get birthed from?
Well, some people have said to me, and not happy about it. Some of my longstanding colleagues and friends, a lot of them who teach and lecture around the world, as I did, and as you do, said, what are you doing? You're driving monolithic into the market. You're legitimizing monolithic. And I said, no, MiYO is not what's driving monolithic. MiYO is a response to monolithic. And, the trend didn't start with MiYO, the monolithic zirconia trend. It started, as we were talking about, 10, 12 years ago. And I think the perception of monolithic has changed dramatically. As I alluded to, probably 10 years ago, I stood on a podium and talked about how monolithic restorations at that point in time weren't very aesthetic. And I had the benefit of actually seeing quite a few R&D projects from different companies and universities around the world who were working on zirconia materials, improving their optical properties, translucencies, and things of that nature. And think about it. 10 years ago, we had really one primary zirconia. It was bone white, really opaque, and not very attractive. It was ugly, but
it was ugly.
I had seen some pretty unbelievable things, and based on what I had seen, I made the comment. I said, you may see monolithic zirconia today as kind of the ugly duckling. I mean, I referred to it as a good enough restoration. I didn't feel it was good enough, but I wanted the audience to know there was a growing number of dentists who certainly saw it that way. And I went as far as to say, look, whether you choose to participate today or not is completely up to you. But understand this, I think in the near future, these restorations will be extraordinary. I mean, the base material advancements have been nothing short of fantastic. And today, in a very short time span, we have high strength, high translucency, multi-layered, multi-opacity. I mean, it's pretty crazy. And, as a ceramist, somebody like yourself and somebody who likes to make things look like natural teeth, became pretty apparent pretty quickly, for me a while back, that there was going to be a need to address these types of restorations and be able to achieve a level of aesthetics that I was used to achieving with layering. And there wasn't anything in the marketplace that could do that. And so, like I said earlier, I took everything I knew about layering materials and the optical effects of layering materials and put it into MiYO. And so it's been a fun project. There's a lot of misconception, actually, Jack, about what aesthetics is and how it's achieved. And you almost never hear this idea of aesthetics and vitality, and the word translucency always becomes a part of that.
Right.
And that's a understanding of how your layering materials work. And that's true for that very narrow category of material. Those things go hand in hand, but that's not how we perceive translucency and depth. Our translucency and depth is something we start to learn when we're babies.
Right.
I spent a lot of time studying those things. We don't have time for it in a discussion today, but it's very interesting. They do a little study with babies called the cliff test. And when they put them on a piece of plastic suspended over a picture, and it's literally a picture of a cliff. And when the baby comes to the end of the cliff, they just keep right on going because they have no experience, and therefore they have no perception of the danger.
Right.
Within 6 months, the baby has fallen enough times. The baby has an understanding. They begin to learn, right? And you put a 6-month-old baby and you repeat the test, they literally crawl right up to the picture of the cliff and they stop. And very often they'll sit up and start crying because they now have this visual cue. And our brains really work the same way. And our perception, our understanding of depth is about visual cues. It's
right.
It's not really this binocular capability that allows us to, oh, there it is, and I can see how deep it is. It's really all based on visual cues. And if you know what the visual cues are, and you can translate those into a material like MiYO, then you end up with, your brain translates it exactly the same way. So it was a fun project. It remains a fun project. And, it's fun to talk to people like you that get it and have used it the way, it was intended. And it gets us, I'm an old ceramics guy, I want to have fun layering teeth, and I want to have that patient, their face explode in joy when they see a beautiful restoration. And, it was inevitable that monolithic was going to be a part of our future. And,
right.
I wasn't happy that was, potentially going to end with that inability to make things beautiful. So that's where MiYO came from.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. And I could tell you, firsthand experience, and I see the results every day, and I use the material myself. In the laboratory, what it's done for the laboratory in its actual environment is nothing short of amazing. And if you take all the advancements we have and then you add MiYO, which is the ceramics advancement, all the parts and the pieces come together, and it's remarkable. For the laboratory, and obviously we're a large laboratory, and there's a lot of technicians from a training aspect, and then with my division being full mouth, full arch rehabilitations, it was, kind of working with the technicians to get them up to speed, and it's a pretty large, something to overcome. When I was working with them with the MiYO, it was very easily done, and they see the results right away. I could tell you now, looking at the restorations again, scaling was always something that I failed miserably at. There's only one Don and there's only one Jack, and working with everybody to try to get them to do whatever you're doing or whatever you're thinking is very difficult. This has made it very, very easy for me to scale, coupled with full contour, the advancements in zirconia, and then the application of MiYO. It's been remarkable. From a business standpoint, what that's done for us is, the laboratories become more efficient. The technicians are able to produce more restorations. For the technicians themselves, it's a quality of life issue, really. I mean, not only we're not sacrificing anything, which is remarkable. And again, I would argue that the results are even better than they were before with traditional or previous techniques. The technicians now, and you know this as well as I do, Don, and there's probably lots of people who probably have a good laugh about this, is you're building up, it could be a full arch restoration, or maybe it's a single central and you're layering it, and you get to the end and it throws a bubble or a fisheye or a crack, and all of those things have been eliminated. Single central, you don't know exactly what your effect may be that you're trying to achieve until you fire it. Things like that, to where the technicians don't have to worry about that no more. They're concentrating on the artistry and the application. They're seeing everything kind of in real time. For me, when I'm working with them early on, kind of training them, they can apply the MiYO ceramic and then set it down. If I'm on a phone call, I could come back and check it.
Yeah.
It's not like layered. It's not like powdered ceramics, to where, and my wife used to laugh all the time. She's actually in the other room. But if I was layering a full arch that day, I was the most intense, angry person in the world. And you could never call me because I couldn't stop. Once you started, you couldn't stop. The clock was, you couldn't let that ceramic dry out. I don't have that problem no more. I could be on a phone call. I could be in a meeting. I could be working with another technician. They could go ahead and apply it, and they could set it down on my bench, and I could come and check it. And at that time, if we need to make changes, we can make them and then fire it. It's unreal, really, in the lab what we've been able to do. It's made us more efficient. I would say the aesthetics have increased, and with technicians are becoming, you'll hear every laboratory talk about this, harder and harder to find. But now you have a product that the technicians you have are more efficient, and therefore creating more restorations, increasing their production, increasing their aesthetics. And then you have a product that you can teach somebody that comes to the bench or bring them up through the laboratory. One of the things I'm doing right now, and by the way, they should call this thing COVID-10, not 19, because I've gained 10 pounds. That's what they should call it. But during this time, one of the things I've been working on is some of the technicians at the laboratory that we would like to bring that are, let's say posterior full contour technicians, bringing them forward and getting them involved in anterior ceramics and full arch ceramics. Full arch and full mouth rehabilitations have been such a massive part of my life. And I look back at it over the course of the years and see where we are today, and how I used to get the results I used to get, and how I get the same results, if not better, today. And it's I can't imagine doing it any other way.
What was the reaction to your dentist clients when you gave them the first monolithic cases made with MiYO?
They actually don't know it's monolithic.
So you never had that dialogue with them. You just said, well, we're going to go for it.
Yeah, you go for it. And I got a lot of friends in the industry that are clinical speakers. There's lots of MiYO love on the clinical side, which I find is fascinating. It fascinates them. Yeah. It really, really does. And they want to know more about it. It's very, very exciting because they don't know it's not layered in a traditional sense. And so when they first find out, you get that "you're kidding me" kind of pause. And my single central days, I don't want to say they're behind me, but again, I'm more involved in full arch stuff, which each presents its own challenges. But right before the COVID, I was working with Dr. Mark Ludlow on a single central case that he was going to present at the AO. And I did the central. I had another technician in the laboratory do another one. We were crunch time, had to get a delivery, so we each did one. And I turned to Dries, Conrad's business partner at the laboratory, and I was done with my central, and I said, this is now not going to the mouth, but in my hands. This is the best central I have ever done in my life. I kid you not. And, I did it while I was doing everything else, while I was handling, general laboratory business as my day goes. I wear many hats. So I was doing it in between that. And when it was all said and done and it came out of the furnace, I looked at it and I said, that's just incredible. Now, I would love to show it to everybody, but it is still not in the patient's mouth. So I have no idea. As everybody knows, single central, we'll find out once it is. But I can tell you, the aesthetics that I was able to achieve, the characterization, it was one of those centrals that you see and you just kind of cringe. You're like, this is going to be a tough one. And I couldn't believe it. So that's what's awesome. MiYO Pink is a huge part of my life. Gingival ceramics. I started doing gingival ceramics when not that many people did. It wasn't commonplace. Dentists definitely didn't want it because, from the clinical side, we're talking about what their kind of opinion is. They didn't want it because historically, it's been very bad. It's one of those things where as technicians, we've always concentrated on dentition, not so much gingiva. And gingiva is, I would say, more difficult than teeth. That's the way I've always looked at it. And for years and years and years, I've worked on my kind of gingival ceramics technique. And it's interesting because there's not really anybody that teaches it out there. Not like, say, single central layering as we know it, right? And so MiYO Pink has completely changed everything for me. And the same thing, going back to the clinicians, I'm able to achieve gingival ceramics like I've never been able to achieve before. And the same thing with the technicians in the laboratory. When we're going back to the clinicians, the results that they're receiving and delivering to the patients, you get absolutely beautiful is what you get. Stunning, amazing, beautiful case. I mean, they're ecstatic. And unless you tell them, and we do have the conversation with them as far as educating, but it's more of a conversation as far as educating them on the new materials and the new techniques. It is layered, but it is layered in a different way, kind of almost in having a conversation with them. And, for the most part early on, and some of my very good friends could not tell that those restorations were not layered in the, traditional historical kind of way.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. And I mentioned Dr. John Sorensen earlier, good friend of mine for a very long time, was sitting in the audience at the American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry, and James Choi was giving a presentation there. It was MiYO, and he cornered, Dr. Sorensen cornered James at the end of his program, and very quickly found out that James and I knew each other. And John said, I got to call Don. I know Don really well. So he called me up literally right after that. He said, listen, I just sat in on James's presentation. And he said, listen, I'm blown away by what I saw. He said, but, I'm a research guy. You know me. I've known John a long time. And I said, I got to see this for myself. Would you guys come up and spend a couple, a week here and do some cases here in the clinic? He said, yeah, we'd love to do that. And James and I flew there. We did two cases there. We did a 6-unit anterior for a young gal, and we did a full upper and lower arch, all on 4, all on 6 for another woman. And you were talking about the material drying. I have a pretty fun story related to that. We saw this patient for the full mouth case at 4:00 in the afternoon, and John had made us a dinner reservation for like 6:30 at night. And we did a little custom shading chairside with this woman and took some pictures, and we just had a sense of what we needed to do. We ran back to the lab, and of course, within about an hour, John walked in and realized we were right in the middle of it, and said, "Well, should I cancel our dinner reservation?" I said, "No, why would you do that?" And he said, "Well, it's going to dry out, and it's going to be ruined." No, it's going to be just fine. Don't even worry about it. He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, don't worry." So we covered it up. We went to dinner. Of course, John and I hadn't seen each other in a while, and we were talking and having a few beers, and it was probably about 10 o'clock at night, and said, you know what? We're not going to go back to the lab tonight. We'll go do it in the morning. And John was like, you can't do that. I said, no, don't worry. It's going to be fine. Well, the funny part was the patient was coming back at 10 o'clock. So there's a lot of lessons in this little story. Patient was coming back at 10 o'clock. We got to the lab at 8. John was already there, lifted the cover up. He couldn't believe it. He's looking at it. He said, "I'm amazed that it's still as wet as the minute you put it down. Nothing has changed." And I said, "Yeah, that's how it works." And before that patient came in, we only spent about 2 hours on a full upper arch and 2 posterior quadrants. And the patient came in at 10 o'clock. We put it in the patient's mouth. The entire student, everybody in the grad pros program, as well as the instructors and Dr. Sorensen, we were all sitting there, and they were all looking, and they were completely blown away, just completely blown away. So yeah, the speed with which you can do it, the user friendliness of it, and then ultimately at the end of the day, the aesthetics. And that's important because our goal was to take monolithic out of what it was. I mean, if you remember, Jack, 10 years ago, monolithic was the low price leader in the lab. Right? It was that ugly crown you did for that doctor who didn't want to spend money. You know what I mean?
It was brutal.
That's not what it is today. I mean, when you take today's zirconia and you put a MiYO on it, like you said, your dentists don't pay for process; they pay for results. Yep. And if you can produce the results
to them,
I mean, honestly, in my opinion, especially when you start talking about these big hybrid cases, I mean, I made a ton of those layered on gold frameworks through the years, and the chip and fracture rate is pretty high. No periodontal ligament. So from a structural point of view and a robust point of view, monolithic zirconia, you can't beat it. The question is, how can you make it look beautiful? And with MiYO, we can do that. So in my way of thinking, it's actually a better restoration than the layered one, because it's not going to chip, it's not going to break, and it looks as good or better than what you did when you layered it.
Yeah, it sacrifices nothing. That's the awesome part about it, is there's no sacrifice. And for the clinicians, it's funny to see the reaction when they couldn't tell and they didn't know. But you're exactly right. At the end of the day, they want to know about the aesthetics, and they want to know about the strength and of the restoration. Some of them, it doesn't really necessarily matter how you got there, right? Yeah. I mean, I always tell everybody, if you're looking at layering, A2 is A2. Doesn't matter how you got there. Well, it does matter how you got there, depending on you, the ceramist. But I mean, at the end, the result is the result, right? It's kind of, it either is or it isn't. And I think the results that we get today that I see are better than what we've ever been able to get before. And it's to see the technicians, they get so excited about it because they get a sense of accomplishment, especially if I have a technician, and confidence is sometimes an issue. That's mainly, let's say, a posterior technician, and they haven't been working on or as comfortable as working on, say, a full arch all on X. To see when they go ahead and do it, their excitement and kind of confidence, it really, really builds confidence. And like you said, I got to laugh about setting it down, because there's so many, I don't want to say hidden benefits, but once you start, really getting into it and using it every single day in the lab, you start discovering all of these other benefits other than aesthetics, right? And setting it down is, believe it or not, it's a huge one.
Especially when you're working on those really big cases. I mean, oh my God.
Yeah. It's brutal. It's like, nobody talk to me right now. Everybody get away from me. Yeah. And now I could set it down. I could take a phone call. I could go to a meeting. I can, help a technician, go through, look at it together, make changes if we need to, right there on the spot, and then go ahead and fire it. So it's a big one. It sounds kind of funny, but it really is.
No, I completely get it. I used to schedule my entire day around sitting down to build a big case, like when am I going to have lunch? When am I going to get to that? You can't take phone calls. You can't do anything. And
can't do anything. I had everything so timed out. And it was like, okay, as soon as I would sit down, I'd take the deep breath. And as soon as you started layering that ceramic, you were committed. The second you sat down, that was it. And until you were done building it, then it would go into fire. But it was always a race against the clock. And it was, you were going, no interruptions, had to fire it. And I could probably attribute a good amount of my hair loss to layering ceramic.
You and me both, I'm kind of getting
but you know what? I'm keeping this. So that's a good sign. I looks like I've kind of, curbed the loss and kind of stopped it.
So Jack, we've got a little drop down here on the right as people are watching, listening to our discussion here, and we've got a question from looks like Michelle Kudma, and asking whether or not when you put a color on a restoration, whether you get the immediate visual of what that color is. And before you answer that, from a development point of view, one of the most important things was to be able to, we like to say is what you see is what you get, right? Whatever you put on the restoration before you fire it, that's exactly what's going to come out. And so, when you're doing a single central and you're putting all those effects in, so, maybe we'll let you answer the question. You put the color on, what do you get? What do you see?
It's instant. Yeah, that's exactly right. You're seeing in real time immediately what it's going to look like. And that's kind of, kind of some of the fun and excitement about it, especially if you're working on, let's say, a single central and you're working on that effect or that characterization. You'll see when I'm applying it, I'll put it on, maybe take a little bit off. It was too much, put a little bit more on. Move it around, and you're actually working in real time. In the color that it's representing at that moment is exactly what you're going to get when you fire it. That is great for the gingival ceramics. That's great for the single central. Takes all the guesswork out of it. You don't have to fire it and wait till the firing cycle completes and take your restoration out to see that you either A, got it, or B, missed, right? No, I'm not going to do that again. It's right there in front of you at that moment, exactly what you're going to get when you fire it. So that is a huge benefit. It's a huge benefit.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that was kind of a key point in the material. And it's not a lot of stains or things that kind of look like MiYO but aren't MiYO. You'll put it on and you fire it, and then you realize that a lot of the color has desaturated or it's dissolved away. It's not what it was, or the color itself shifts. That was something that was incredibly important to make sure that the chemistry of the material of the MiYO colors were such that while it's wet, you see visually, as is the exact same refractive index wet as it has once it's been fired, right? So the liquids and everything else have to have the same refractive index as the fired glass.
Right.
Because once you fire it, the liquids are gone, obviously, and what you're left with is the color and the ceramic itself. So that was really important. And not only to be able to see whatever you see is what you're going to get, but part of that, what you see is what you get, is that the color chroma and the hue remain exactly the same. They don't change either. So those were just a couple of the really important parts of the development, and that all kind of was part of the deal. And your ability to, float one color on top of another and not have them mix unless you want to, was also part of it, because we wanted to make something that was very efficient, and if you have to color something and then fire it to set it, then come back and color it again, well, that's not very efficient. You know what I mean? And so, those are important characteristics. So we're always excited when somebody gets that and understands it and has fun with that.
What was a big, during the development, what was a big whoa moment for you, or a big moment of excitement when you looked at it and said, wow, look at this?
I think I've always tested everything in the mouth. To me, I never get paid, other than a hands-on course. You don't get paid for making things on the bench, right? I mean, and I spent a lot of time in a dental office. I worked chairside with Dr. Peter Worley in Newport Beach for almost 10 years. I was in Bob Winter's office in Milwaukee for 4 years. So, for me, making, you have a vision of what something's going to be, and then you do it, and then you put it in the patient's mouth. And of course, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You always learn something, and that's important. So, being able to kind of translate those ideas. I mean, I want to say this the right way. I wasn't really surprised, because, I thought the concepts behind the material were based on what we saw in layering materials, right?
Right.
When you have stains, you have everything kind of with the same opacity, the same translucency. And so you never can create contrast. You can't move the light around like you do with a layering material. Layering material, when you think about your kit, there's opacious dentins, enamels, mamelon materials, things like that. They also have different concentrations of color. You have different opacities and translucencies. And it's the playing of the juxtaposition of those different colors and opacities and translucencies that create the visual cues that our brains translate into 3 dimensions, right? And so all of that was put into the system. And as we were playing with it, I'll never forget the week that James and I were at Chemical, when we were really developing the material, and we were feverishly making crowns with samples. No, we need a little more of this, or change that. And I think the people at Chemical were kind of looking at us like, these guys are crazy. But and I'll never forget the look on everybody's face. It was probably like the second or third day when we had a kind of a rough sense of materials, right? We had some dentin colored materials that were medium translucency, and we had some high opacity mamelon colors and some high translucency enamel effects, and we just were playing around, and we were making a single central the way we would layer one. And James and I ran over to the bench and I showed James, and James was like, wow, he was like, that's unbelievable. And James would make something and he'd run over and show me, and we were like 2 little kids. And it was like my first reaction to my first hands-on layering course, like 30 years ago. It was like the first course I took with like Willie Geller or somebody, It was just fun. And when we showed it around to everybody at Chemical, they were blown away. They were just blown away.
And, it definitely puts a smile on your face.
Yeah.
It definitely puts a smile on your face. It's not, it's not something you've seen before. It's not something you've done before. A regurgitated technique. When you're like that single central that I was working on, you can't help but smile. And the same thing with the technicians in the laboratory. Again, that sense of accomplishment, that restoration, or that level of aesthetics that they didn't believe they could themselves achieve. And then they have it right in front of themselves. It's sitting, right in front of them, made with their own hands is pretty awesome. So,
yeah. So I'm looking at some of the questions here, Jack. Before we get to some of those questions and maybe address them, the one thing I think is also part of the evolution of monolithic, along with the evolution in aesthetics that we've seen over the last 10 years, and certainly MiYO, we're hopeful, is a big part of that. comes how labs position these with their dentist customers, right? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, monolithic 10 years ago was kind of the low price entry in the laboratory. I'm assuming, given the complexity of the cases you guys are doing, even though they're monolithic, they certainly aren't the cheapest restorations in your lab.
No, no. You know, with
they be, by the way.
What's that?
Nor should they be, by the way.
No. And that's something to keep in mind too, as the laboratories that are listening. Because something is advantageous for you, it does not mean that should reflect as or equate to lesser pricing, right? If anything, the prices should remain the same or increase. By no means are restorations what a lot of people would say. One thing Dries and Conrad always believed in that they did not do was the race to the bottom. And so we're able to, when we're talking to the clinicians, and I got to say this, from a product standpoint, a material standpoint, a ceramic, MiYO it's an incredible excitement on the clinical side. So again, a lot of my good friends in prosthodontics and that, they're very eager to learn more about it. They want to know more. They're very excited about the material. It really piques their curiosity. And a lot of times they get to see the results, and it's fascinating to them. When we're talking with clinicians, let's say Joe Doctor, we're talking about, you really have to bring them up to speed, because believe it or not, and I work with a lot of the universities in the graduate prosthodontic residencies. And sometimes from the university level, there's a delay or a lag of information getting back to them that's current. So we talk about zirconias, the new modern zirconias and the advancement zirconia scene. And then we talk about MiYO and the advancement in ceramic, okay? The key, for me, kind of key verbiage that I use when I'm talking to them is, high strength and aesthetics. So they're not going to worry about, chipping, fracturing, things like that. Yeah, you have the strength, and the aesthetics are world class, and they're in.
I'll pass this one story on to you, and then I think we should take a look at some of these questions here, because they're kind of stacking up. But I know we had an invitation to go to a clinic in the middle of the country, and this was a large dental practice that specialized in all-on-4, all-on-6 restoration types, and really nice operation, great staff there, and we had an opportunity to do a side-by-side with them. So we said, you make your layered restoration, and they have some this was unbelievably skilled technicians there, and they did. They made the full upper and lower arch, and we said, before you place it in the mouth, send it to us on the model, and we'll scan it, and we'll mill it out as a monolithic restoration, and we'll use MiYO to finish it, and then we'll put both restorations in the mouth, the layered one and the monolithic MiYO one. And the way the story goes is this was done. So upper layered arch against a lower MiYO arch, and vice versa, and then full layered and full MiYO. And the dentist and the entire staff and the patient, looking, and they were like, they couldn't tell the difference. They just wow. And and the dentist looked at us and he said, and this won't chip. No, it won't chip, and it won't fracture, it won't delaminate. And he said, and he looked at his technicians and he said, I get about 30%, 35% of these cases within the first 3 years will come back with some kind of chipping or fracturing, and he was completely sold. He'd seen the aesthetic results for himself, directly compared on a single patient to the layered version, and couldn't believe what was achieved there.
Yeah, it sacrifices nothing in terms of aesthetics, and then you get the strength. I tell everybody when I'm talking with them, if let's say we're talking about, for example, an all-on-X case, and I'm explaining to the doctors, and they say, I tell them, is it layered? And I tell them it's layered. It's just layered in a different way. with a modern material, with a modern technique. You're not sacrificing aesthetics with full arch or anything on implants. It's not a matter of if it's going to chip; it's going to be when, right? Especially incisal edges are most common, buccal cusps, things like that. And you don't have to worry about any of this. And you didn't sacrifice nothing as far as aesthetics go. So it's amazing.
There was one question I was looking at a few minutes ago, Jack, and maybe you want to weigh in on this too. One of the listeners was asking if they're layering color onto a restoration, and they're layering different colors. Maybe they go from a body color to an enamel color, or maybe they're working in the incisal and they've got the enamel down and they're putting mamelons. And they're asking, can I touch two colors together without them bleeding into one another?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The float on color on top of color is absolutely a real thing. And that's okay. So let's say I'm layering, right? Like our definition in our mind would be, but with the liquid ceramics. So you can absolutely put one on top of another or one side by side. It's not going to run into each other. It's not going to mess it up. And it's going to stay right where you put it unless you forcefully move it, right? So that's kind of how you start building your effects and your characterization, is exactly that way. That's what I want to do. I want to put them side by side. I want to put them on top of each other, one over the other. And that's how I'm going ahead and building all of my characterization into my restoration.
Yeah, so that was, we talked about the development aspect of this, and the what you see is what you get, that color part of it. But part of that whole development was floating color on top of color. This is probably the best way we refer to it, which is there is a surface tension which is built into the material, which allows you to lay down a layer of wet color and then literally float another layer or elements of different colors on top of that, and it doesn't move. It doesn't like bleed in. It doesn't move around. It's not diluted by the previous color.
Nope.
It's a very unique and interesting characteristic, but it does give you the control, like when you're working in the incisal third and you've got, let's say, smoke, a whole layer of smoke, and then you've got maybe some storm or cobalt in your mesial and distal incisal edge for that high translucency, and you start laying in mamelons and crack lines and all these things. You want to be able to do that in one application. You don't want to have to put one effect and then fire and then another and then fire and so forth, back and forth. That's not efficient, and that's certainly not what we wanted to see happen. So it took a long time to develop that surface tension material that allows you to do that.
Yeah, that handling property is one of the great benefits of the material. As you're building the characterization, the color right on top of itself, and the way that it handles that quality that it has is what makes it so user friendly. For the technicians, it makes it easy to teach, and it makes it easy for them, for ceramists, for me to use. It's that ability in itself is really, really incredible.
There's another great question here from Scott. Material selection regarding your zirconia, 3Y, 4Y, 5Y. Does it matter? What kinds of value? When I see value, I mean, obviously that translates into the translucency or the opacity of the base material itself. So why don't you share with the listeners what your philosophy is and when you choose what material, or do you use one material all the time?
Okay. Yeah, I use basically generally I'll have two zirconias in the laboratory. 3Y zirconia I do not use anymore. It's very early on, and I don't see, when you're getting into that range, you're talking about really kind of off the chart strength, but you get more into that really opacious material. When we come into modern 4Ys, you get a very, very nice aesthetic, and you're still getting a lot of strength. I think kind of industry-wise, we went strength drunk, We went completely off the charts. And then we went the direct opposite and went really, really weak. So where you're coming into the new 5Ys and the new 4Ys, there's kind of a balance right to where we should be. So in the lab, I'll carry a 5Y, generally a multi-layer zirconia of sort. That's going to be for my interior cases, my cosmetic cases. And I'll carry a 4Y, and that 4Y is going to be for my hybrid restorations that I use. With those materials, and like Don said earlier, as a base, they provide an outstanding base to apply your MiYO ceramics to. They're really, really nice, and that's where I start out for all the restorations.
Yeah, for me, Jack, I obviously, depending on the size of the case and the span of a bridge, for example, there are certain indications for use. So you couldn't use a 5Y, for example, on a long span bridge. But so once you put those considerations aside, for me, I look at what am I trying to achieve here? And I look at the base material, the zirconia itself, in much the same way I used to look at opacious dentin. If I've got a really bright color, for example, I found that the more translucent zirconias, if you know, the older 5Ys, for example, were always too gray. If I had an A1 shade and I was doing a central or 6 anteriors or something, and I did it in 5Y, it was always way too low in value, dead looking. So I really look at my material selection now as much, as I look at the indications for use, right? I need a long span bridge and I need something that's strong. I'm also looking at how much light reflection, how much brightness am I going to get? And if I've got a lighter shade, remember, even in our layering ceramics, it's easy for us to bring value down. It's hard to bring value up. And so I like to start with a brighter material like a 3Y or a 4Y, something like that. I may even go a shade lighter. If I've got an A2, I may go with an A1. Sometimes I use a white zirconia and maybe add a little bit of color to it in the green state around the margins and stuff to warm it up. And then I like that base. I don't recommend it to somebody who's never used MiYO because it's once you're comfortable, it's like riding a bike. Once you can ride with no hands and you can do all those fun things and go over jumps and stuff, then going with a white zirconia can be a lot of fun and very rewarding. But in the beginning, I generally look for those different opacities based on how much value I need and how much brightness I need, because I can always tamp that down. So that's kind of my criteria. But another question from my good friend Jimmy McClendon: how aggressive are we with the structure materials? You wanna address that, Jack?
Yeah. So structure was interesting for me. It's kind of funny, but I attribute all of my success to miserable failures that I've had in life. When I first started working with the structure material, as a ceramist, a traditional ceramist, my idea was I was building it up, right? So I used very, very little of the MiYO shades. And it's opposite of this, but I used very, very little, and I tried to gain everything, and I tried to build the MiYO structure like I was building ceramic. Yeah. And that's not how it actually works. But in your mind, that's what you're thinking. Yeah. It's reversed, where you'll do everything with your MiYO shades, and then again, the structure is for surface texture, anatomy. Just that little oomph at the end.
Yeah, I get it completely, and I can't tell you how many times I've had this same discussion with other people. So I'm not sure, Jimmy, what you mean by how aggressive, but in general, here's what you kind of got to get your head around. When somebody sees structure, they think enamel. And they think traditional layering materials. And of course, without the enamel layer, which is half a millimeter generally in thickness, you don't get the vitality out of your layered ceramic restoration. The MiYO structure wasn't designed to do that. I alluded to it earlier when we were talking about the visual cues that our brain relies on to make judgments about depth and vitality. Those are more contrast issues. So what I generally tell people is don't think of your structure as that material you need to layer on top like you did your enamel to create that depth and translucency, because you won't get there. You want to achieve all that depth and that perception of depth and translucency with the MiYO colors, right? That juxtaposition, that contrast between your smoke and your storm and your mamelons and your halo and your crack lines, all of those colors layered appropriately will give your brain the perception that that's a three-dimensional restoration. And the structure, as you know, when you use any kind of liquid ceramic, even a traditional stain, which is not really a liquid ceramic, but it flows on the surface in a very kind of similar way, you don't get that surface texture. And you don't get the texture, you don't get the light scattering effect, right? So structure was really designed only for that purpose. So you do everything you want to see in terms of depth and translucency and vitality, you want to see in the MiYO color. And when that's done and you look at that and you say, that's perfect, it's beautiful. The only thing I'm missing is that texture and that light scattering from that texture on the surface. That's the role of structure, right? Put it on super thin. In the beginning, if you're not real comfortable on how to get your surface texture in while it's wet, play with it a little. I recommend to people, play with it a little bit, fire it. If you don't like your texture, as you know, Jack, you can grind on it with a diamond and create the texture that way, and then run it up again real quick just to let it self-glaze again, and you're done. And as you build up your confidence in your capability in putting those surface details in wet, you get to the point where you don't need to do that anymore. So in general, my structure is about 1/10 of a millimeter, really not much more than that.
Yeah, and on the gingival ceramics, you know, on that side, when I go ahead and apply the shades, you'll see all the depth and the characterization. When it comes out of the oven, you can look at that and say, wow, I mean, it's all there. The structure is kind of just the bow on top of the wrapping, so or the icing on the cake, what have you, and then you apply the structure, and it just brings it right to life. That little bit of oomph. It's really nice. And I know when I first seen the kits, and when I first started working with MiYO, one of the things I envisioned right away and hoped for was the expansion of the kits. Was the idea of it was exciting to me. And I know in Chicago you had the opal structures. So I'm going to inject a little bit. I'm going to kind of ask a question myself. And can you tell me a little bit more about the opal structures?
Well, I'm happy to do so. We are running past our time here, Jack. So I'll answer that question for you. We'll take a few more questions if that pop up here, and then we probably have to put a bow on it for today. But yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, it's like any ceramic system. Think about the layering systems that you've been using over the years, and you know, we're always in need of trying to push the envelope, right, to get this effect or that effect that we find in natural teeth. Opal was something even that goes all the way back to the very beginning development, and what we had hoped we would be able to achieve was an opal effect like you see in a normal layering kit, using the liquid ceramics that we were using. The problem is with traditional opal materials and layering materials, they require really kind of a minimum volume, right? A minimum thickness in order to achieve that effect. And we tried everything we could do to try to get that opal effect in 1/10 of a millimeter, and we couldn't, because by the time we built up enough opal material, it was white. That's just the way that the materials, the opal technology that's in your layering ceramics works. And so we had to put the opal off for a while, and we have somebody here is a PhD in material science that came to me and said, look, how are we going to solve this problem? Can you think of a way to solve this problem? Because opal is a really important part of natural teeth. And he said to me, let me think about it. And 2 days later, he came back to me with a piece of metal, and on it was this film, and you could turn it, and every color of the rainbow was there. And I said, well, what am I looking at? And he said, I did my PhD thesis on this. And I said, wow. And I don't want to give it away, but I said, do you think we could make a structure that within 1/10 of a millimeter would give us an opal effect that looks using this technology? And he said, I think so. And it took about a year, but we were able to realize it. And it's a technology that doesn't exist in dentistry at all. In fact, it exists in very few industries. It's more theoretical, but we were able to take it and apply it, and the effect is just outstanding. So it's in production right now, and we have an enamel, an opal enamel, which is more like the regular structure window. We have an opal window like the regular window with an opal effect, and an opal enamel, which is like the enamel in the structure, and actually a opal glaze. And they're phenomenal materials. They're really excited about that. So I look forward to getting some in your hands.
Yeah, sounds awesome.
Well, Jack, listen, it's been a pleasure, spending the last hour with you. Thank you for sharing your experience. And, I'm still waiting on that beer, though.
Yeah, I was going to
beer.
We could probably keep going until it's beer 30, and we could do this beer and cigars, right?
Sounds good.
Beer, cigars, and MiYO at the same time.
Looks like Dad's back in the picture. It looks like Kevin's going to get in on the fun now. So
break it up. No, I hate to even interrupt you guys. I mean, that's I think not only are you enjoying the conversation, but clearly everybody that joined us today is enjoying it. So it's great to see, and we really appreciate that. I think some great questions, some great insights. So I'd like to just thank you both and thank everybody for joining us. I hate to cut it short. Maybe we can do it again.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Awesome, guys. Thanks again, and thanks for your innovation, your efforts, and joining us today. And hope everybody stays safe and productive as we look to start opening things back up again. Yeah. And enjoyed you guys. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
See ya.